Today on the Crested Butte is Home podcast, my guest is Maddie Rehn of the Gunnison Public Lands Initiative. And I've been talking about public lands quite a bit on some of these podcasts because it's a subject that I'm pretty passionate about. After all, Gunnison County is about 80% public lands, and that's the reason why so many of us are here to hike and bike and ski and snowmobile and fish and everything else. So that's why I like to talk about it, and this is a great group of diverse interests that are all trying to find common ground and protect our public lands. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I hope you enjoy the show. As always, please subscribe on iTunes or anywhere else that you like to listen to your podcasts. I recently got an Alexa device, and it takes a little while, but if you say open tune in and play the latest episode of Crested Butte is Home, you can play this podcast on an Alexa device too. So that's another way that you can listen. And as always, give me a rating or a review. I love hearing back. So let's get on with the interview. Today on Crested Butte is Home, my guest is Maddie Rehn. And Maddie, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and all of that.
Yeah, happy to be here, and a little bit about myself. I grew up in Summit County, Colorado, so not too far from the Gunnison Valley. It was a wonderful place to grow up, very much a mountain community like Crested Butte. And as it grew and expanded and I was looking for a new place to go, I found the Gunnison Valley and have been here since 2007, in and out a couple times, but this place always calls me back as home.
How did you end up here originally then? Just had you visited or how'd you get here?
I moved here sight unseen, actually. I finished high school, and growing up in Summit County, everybody wanted to go to CU Boulder. And I said, anywhere but Boulder. And found out that there was a ski area close to Western State College, and that checked the box that I needed to have, and moved here, like I said, sight unseen in 2007, and did undergrad and hung around after.
Wow. Awesome. Mm-hmm. What did you do growing up in Silverthorne? What were your passions there?
Yeah, growing up in Summit County, we did a lot of the mountain lifestyle. We did a lot of camping and hiking in the summer, and then in the winter, you're surrounded by 11 ski areas within 30 miles, so you're spending a lot of your time on ski resorts and back in the woods on snowshoes and skis, and just kind of enjoying outdoors.
Did you compete in it? Like, were you a ski racer or any other like competitive pursuits, or just for fun? Just
for fun. I don't really have a competitive bone in my body, actually.
Okay.
I always told people that if I was running, they should be running because something else is probably going on or wrong. So it was always just enjoyment. It was leisure. It was fun. It was a chance to just get out and enjoy the woods.
And was that, and you keep saying we, is that as a family? You guys would all go out and backpack or whatever?
Yeah, it was very much a family endeavor. I remember the first time I ever did like a multi-day backpacking trip. We did, the five of us. I have two older sisters and my parents, and we hiked through the Gore Range, which is north of Silverthorne and south of Kremling. So we did 3 days in the Gore Range as a family, and that was kind of my introduction to overnight backpacking and those sort of longer trips in the woods.
Did you do like a point-to-point, or did you just do a loop?
We did a point-to-point.
Nice.
We had friends in Kremling, so we were able to actually leave from the front door of my parents' house because it's adjacent to National Forest.
Wow.
And just walk out the front door and end up at a friend's house on the other end, and they give us a ride back home.
Wow, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Gore Range it's a fun range, but it's not easy actually. It's rugged for sure.
It's a very rugged one.
So what did you study then at Western State?
Yeah, in my undergrad at Western, I studied environmental studies and natural resource management. So that was a combination of some social classes as well as more sciences and biology and ecology and those sort of things. And that was a great combination for me to solidify some of my interests that I learned from being a kid growing up in the mountains, as well as what it takes to manage some of these public spaces. And that's where I first got my introduction to public lands management. And then continued my education in graduate school and got a degree in Master's in Environmental Management, and the emphasis there was collaboration and natural resources.
So you went straight from undergrad to grad school, or did you work for a little while between?
I took some time off in between. I think it ended up being about 4 years. Okay. I did the ski bum lifestyle in CB after finishing school and living in Gunnison. And then I also moved for a year and lived in Reno, Nevada.
Why Reno? What happened in Reno?
I got a job with the Department of Agriculture, which was kind of the initiation for the move, but it turned out to be a really incredible city. You're 11 miles from the California state line.
Yeah.
It has a similar dynamic where Reno is 30 minutes to Truckee and Lake Tahoe. And so a lot of time was spent going up and hanging out at the lake and skiing at the ski areas up in the Lake Tahoe region. So it was a fun exploratory year, but California doesn't have quite the vibe of Colorado that, or the pace of life that I'm attracted to.
Oh, really? Even Tahoe felt fast-paced compared to here?
Maybe not as fast-paced, similar mountain lifestyle, but a lot of people.
Yeah.
Very heavily populated, a lot of people on the trails. You really have to find yourself far out to get some solitude and
interesting.
Just a lot more of congestion and traffic being closer to bigger city centers like Sacramento and that sort of thing.
Right. Huh. Interesting. Would have thought it was a little quieter, but all right, well, let's just jump into what you're doing now. So let's talk about your job and just tell us about that.
So I run Gunnison Public Lands Initiative, which is a coalition of 10 local organizations that are looking at additional protections for public lands in Gunnison County. We're a diverse group. We are representative of a wide suite of interests on public lands. So anything from motorized recreation to ranching to sportsmen's interests with hunting and fishing, conservation, or water resources, to name a few. And so this group has been working collaboratively for the past 2 years to develop a proposal that we one day hope to turn into our congressional leadership to turn into a bill that could be passed by Congress for permanent protections for the landscapes in Gunnison County.
That's only been 2 years? I feel like it's been longer, but...
Yeah, so this collaborative group with the 10 stakeholders started in February of 2016.
Okay.
But this is very much an outgrowth of conversations that have been ongoing locally since 2012.
Okay.
Which is when Senator Michael Bennet first came and did a site visit here in Crested Butte, actually out in Obie Joyful Falls. And at that time, he said he was hearing the concerns of the local community and felt that public lands management is something that the local voices of the people who live here and know them and their livelihoods are dependent on them need to have a voice in how those are managed. And said if there was a community group that could come together and find a long-term vision for public lands, he'd be willing to carry that forth to Congress. And so back in 2012 was when the conversations first started and groups worked on putting proposals together. And so by 2014, there were 3 proposals put out, one by the original GPLI coalition that was mountain biking conservation interests, Trout Unlimited and their local chapter of the national organization that works on cold water fisheries had a proposal put together, and then the local chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers had a proposal.
Huh. Okay.
So there were actually 3 proposals floating around, and that's when the Gunnison County got involved and convened the group that is now the larger coalition of GPLI that's come out with a consensus-based proposal that took into consideration those previous ideas, as well as additional input from other stakeholders that didn't put together a proposal in the past.
Huh. Okay. That's that's new to me, so that's really cool. So why was Bennett thinking that? Is it because before GPLI there was also Hidden Gems, which is a wilderness proposal. So was his comments kind of in response to Hidden Gems and some of the opposition to that, or was it totally separate?
No, it's very much connected in the sense that Hidden Gems was not well received within the community because it was in a much larger geographic area. This was before my time, but my understanding is that it was Eagle County, Summit County, and Gunnison County. And
Pitkin, too, I think. It was up in Roaring Fork, too. But.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so with it being the 4, the local community here in Gunnison said, whoa, these are our lands. We know them really well. Public lands are so much the fabric of our community, and they felt that some of the proposals were not an accurate representation of the community's wishes.
Yeah.
And so when that ended up losing momentum, Senator Bennett said, well, if you guys are still interested and this is something that you're passionate about, let's have a local dialogue about that. And that's where GPLI came into play. And so now the conversations have evolved much more than that and gotten us to where we are today.
Gotcha. That's fascinating because all right, I'm supposed to interview you, but I'll just get my 2 cents. It was interesting because I was not a fan of Hidden Gems, and I had said some things, and the director of Hidden Gems actually came to me, and we had a cup of coffee and talked. But it was interesting because it was like, yeah, but this is how it's going to be. A little bit. And then very much different, your predecessor Hillary contacted me out of the blue like, hey, you ski a lot and bike a lot, can I show you some maps and buy you a beer and we'll just chat? And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So it was interesting. I mean, those 2 very, very different styles of talking about land. But anyway, let's describe like some of the different land designations and special management areas and what those are compared to wilderness and what some of the different ideas of GPLI are as it currently stands.
Yeah, so when I say public land protections, GPLI is looking at 2 different tools to do that. And we're doing it at the congressional level, which means that the management direction of federal public lands, such as Forest Service or BLM lands, would have long-term directives. And wilderness is one of those tools, and the directives for wilderness have been outlined by the Wilderness Act of 1964.
Yeah.
And so that bill very clearly states what allowed and prohibited uses can happen in wilderness areas. And wilderness is the highest level of protection for federal public lands in the sense that they're some of our wildest landscapes in terms of rare and endangered species being present on the landscape, highly valued watersheds or headwaters, incredible opportunities for backcountry hunting, fishing, angling, opportunities for solitude. And that's different from the other tool that we're looking at, which is generally referred to as special management areas. And there's not an organic act like the Wilderness Act of 1964 that says what allowed and prohibited uses are, but that the legislation is written to allow for a very tailored set of opportunities. So that could mean that you have a special management area that could allow for mountain biking in the summer and snowmobiling in the winter, but not allow for commercial timber harvest or allow for no new road development. which is very different from wilderness, where mountain biking is not allowed and motorized recreation isn't allowed. So with the combination of these two tools, we're really able to look at a broader set of landscapes to protect them for their ecological and recreation, scientific, wildlife values that, I've really found through my work that this community has a deep appreciation for. Mm-hmm. Because wilderness areas tend to be what they call rock and ice, which is high altitude landscapes where there's not a lot of use. And so it's easier to kind of have that level of protections on there when there isn't as much use.
Yeah.
And so through using this combination of tools, we really get to look at a broader set of landscapes and think about things like protecting sage-grouse habitat and sagebrush landscapes, which have a lot of use on them from, heritage ranching or restoration projects for Gunnison sage-grouse, which is under the threatened species list under the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah.
And when you look across the nation, sagebrush is largely underrepresented in public land protection systems across from coast to coast.
Sure.
And so it really provides an opportunity to think about landscape level protections from valley floors to iconic mountain peaks, where you can ensure that migration routes for big game are in consideration. Mm-hmm. And then the recreation that we all love and care about here is also a part of that vision.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess kind of to expand on, so you're working with all these different groups. So what was it like working with groups that are on either end of the spectrum in some ways?
Yeah. When we first started this process 2 years ago, it was tense, to be honest. People weren't sure what the work was going to entail and what everyone's goals were, how we were going to accomplish those goals. But I have been so surprised and so impressed with this group. A lot of them are volunteers for their organization and have dedicated countless hours of time to this project, because through those discussions we found very much so common ground, and that common ground is a deep love for public lands and the way that influences the lifestyles and the livelihoods that we have here. Uh-huh. And so that connection and that bond that we all have to this place and this landscape and the ability that it, or I guess the way that it supports who we are as a community, was foundationally a place that we could build off of and have tough conversations and be willing to make compromises and know that in the end, the long-term goal is something that maybe wouldn't look like exactly what we did if we worked alone, but by working together, we're creating something stronger and really taking into consideration this place as a whole. And it's been just outstanding. I'm so impressed with all of the people who have, not only represented their interest, but also gone back to the community and said, hey, this is what we're thinking. What do you guys see? How does this work for you? And then bringing that back to really make it a dialogue that's back and forth and built together.
What's your role within that? Like at a meeting, are you kind of sitting on the sidelines, or are you actively trying to find the common ground, I guess?
Yeah, so we have a professional facilitator who came in the beginning and was very much that person to help through the process and help ask the questions and guide us to figure out what we wanted to see as a whole and build that together. So at that point, I was at the table and feeling like I had my voice and my input to put into that. Uh-huh. But through the 2 years we've been working together, we've become a very well cohesive group in the sense that we work great together. And so my role has now been shifted a little bit to more of that leadership role within the organization to say, all right, guys, as a group, where are we at? Do the check-ins. If I learn new information from a community member about a specific area and it affects 3 out of the 10 groups' interests, I'm talking with them about that, getting their feedback, and then kind of bringing that all into one cohesive place where we can make decisions as a group.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Nice. That's probably a good place to be, right?
It is. It's a great place to be. I say that, GPLI, we would not be where we are without the coalition organizations or the member groups. And so I largely am proud of I'm very proud of this group, and to be the person who gets to work with all of them and synthesize that information is a great place to be.
Nice. Let's take a quick break. In the Crested Butte Real Estate Minute, I wanted to talk about the fallen inventory in Mount Crested Butte condos. At the end of June, there were 105 condos listed, and now in early September, that number is all the way down to 65, and that's not just seasonal. That's not a trend that we're seeing in Gunnison or Crested Butte South or anywhere else. So that's just near the ski area. I'm sure some sellers are just waiting on the sidelines to hear that the Vail sale has completed, and that's certainly one strategy. On the other hand, with a limited supply, you can do very well for yourself and go ahead and list now and be one of the few choices around. So that's one way to look at it. And if you're a buyer right now, don't forget that there are other areas than Mount Crested Butte to find a condo. I have a great 2-bedroom, 2-bath listed right now in CB South with a garage for under $250,000, and that's something we might not see for quite a long time in the Crested Butte area. So there are values around if you're willing to look around. My name is Frank Consella. My website is crestedbutterealestateagent.com. You can find my contact info there and a lot of info. There's an FAQ on there that's very valuable, I think, for a lot of people. So give me a shout, and let's get back to the show. Okay, getting back to it, what were some of the hardest challenges that you had trying to get people to see eye to eye?
Yeah, we had some really tough conversations because the challenge of GPLI is thinking big, is thinking long term, and what is it that you want to envision for our local public lands in the long term? Yeah. And so, there are people who are very interested in making sure that there's quality habitat for big game and that there's a large amount of habitat for big game, because that is an influencer of how healthy game herds are locally. Okay. But then there are other folks who have master plans for future trail development, and sometimes those things don't go hand in hand because recreation can have a significant impact on fragmentation of landscapes and impacts to wildlife. Uh-huh. Or increase in recreation could have potential negative impacts on places where there's grazing allotments and where our local ranchers have been grazing for generations. And so keeping all of those interests in mind, where is the balance? And so there was a lot of give and take, and I think that with this group, we were able to find that because people here wear a lot of hats. You may come to the table to be a representative for winter motorized use, but your family has also had ranch land here for a long time. Right. And so, there may be somebody who works for a conservation or a sportsman's organization that's looking out for the highest level of protections for wildlife, but they also ride their mountain bike. Right. So there's this level of understanding of the lifestyle that we live here that allowed us to have those tough conversations between future development and protections to get to a common ground. Nice. Yeah.
So what were some of the best accomplishments you think that GPLI has had thus far?
I would say our biggest accomplishment thus far happened in June of 2017, where we had been meeting once a month for 18 consecutive months. These meetings were 4 hours each.
Must have been fun.
It was a lot of time doing really technical work in terms of nitty-gritty things I'd never learned before, not only about the landscape and where uses are occurring and what uses those are, but what are the logistics of public lands management from an agency's perspective? What are the rules and regulations that they have to abide by? How is that different from a congressional public lands bill? And just really getting into the weeds on public lands management and what it takes to run public lands. Yeah. And that collective learning that we did over 18 months, we came out with what we feel is a carefully vetted and a really solid understanding of public lands and the potential protection for up to 1 million acres of public lands locally. It's a huge accomplishment in my mind, because when I see other colleagues who are working in this field in other places in the West, that consensus and that collaboration oftentimes isn't there. And so I think we have something really special here, and that sense of community that was put into the work that this group has done, and releasing that initial proposal in June of last year was a huge milestone in a very long-term discussion that we're hoping to have in terms of taking this all the way to DC and hitting the floor in Congress.
And so that's where it stands right now, right? So you've released basically the ideas that everyone came up with now to the public to comment on, and is that kind of where it stands right now, or what's going on right now?
Yeah, so that has been our main effort over the past year, because we knew that although we're a diverse group and we're, there's 10 of us, 15 of us around the table at times, we are representative, and we wanted to have the community give us feedback, to cross-check our work, to make sure that it made sense. We didn't miss anything. And there were things that we did miss, and we've had a lot of input from the community, and we've now been incorporating that into the proposal. We last met in May, and with it now being August, we've been taking that synthesis of information we learned from the community and starting to backfill what we've learned and make changes and revisions to our initial ideas to reflect that input from the community.
So once, if there's a bunch of input from the public, then do the 10 members go back through it basically and give their 2 cents once again? Yeah,
so for example, that we looked at one area in particular that somebody had requested we take a second look at our recommendation. We had proposed a special management area that would allow for summer mountain biking, but this other group felt that it could actually be and qualify for wilderness. And so we took their request very seriously, and we met several times as a small subgroup of interests who were looking at that particular landscape to say, all right, let's go through this again. Did we get it right? What's all the information we reviewed at the time? How did we come to our determination? What's new and different that the public's bringing to the table, and does that information change our decision? And so going through the motions and having those conversations, the public groups that we were working with ended up saying, yeah, actually, we feel like this could work. Although it's maybe not what our organization individually would want, we see the greater good here in how you as a coalition came to that recommendation. And so they cross-checked us, which was exactly what we asked for, and was a great process to go through in terms of understanding and reaffirming that the research that we did and the recommendations that we made are that common ground and that compromise that could work for everyone.
Gotcha. So what's next, I guess? What are the next steps? What's the timeline going forward?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. In a lot of other fields, people work on deadlines of when things are done. And this is very much an organic process. So we're taking the time that we need to make sure that the proposal we develop now is accurate. And so, like I said, we're making those revisions, but we're hoping to come out with the 2.0 or the revised version here in the fall for the public to see how that input they've been providing has helped to shape the proposal, and hopefully soon be able to work with our congressional leaders to build and draft legislation.
Okay. Gotcha.
Long-term goals, maybe, introduction to Congress in 2020, passage by 2022.
Okay.
So we've got some time in front of us.
Yeah, okay. So what, with that kind of long timeline, if Bennett was the one who kind of said, let's do this, what if he's not around anymore? Would you still hopefully get that backing, or what?
Yeah.
What's the plan then?
Yeah, so Senator Michael Bennett has been our champion so far, but we are in District 3 and we have 3 representatives, and so we plan to work with all of our representatives, and Representative Tipton is up for re-election right now, so there's a chance that we could have a new representative in District 3 for Colorado. And so when they come in, that would be someone who we would work with and hopefully bring up to speed with where we're at. And, all 3 of our leaders in Congressional District 3 are important in making sure that this passage happens.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go back to you. So why is this even important to you? Why do you care?
Yeah, so talking about where I grew up in Summit County, when I was a kid, it was very much a small mountain town. Mm-hmm. But its proximity to Denver and its proximity to I-70, I watched that town explode in population and development as I grew up.
Yeah.
And I felt that the town very much lost a lot of its heart.
Mm-hmm.
We lost the small town community feel of mom and pop shops as big box stores came in.
Mm-hmm.
A ton of expansion in terms of development for shopping and expansion of ski areas to the point where, some of our favorite side country and backcountry places were now being developed for ski resorts.
Uh-huh.
And that really motivated me when I moved to Gunnison and found a place that felt like my childhood home, which was wild landscapes and a deep sense of community. And through GPLI, I think that we have an opportunity to maintain some of that character and this wild backcountry feel to our landscape that I think a lot of us who live here and have homes are drawn to.
Yeah.
Which was my motivation to get involved in this and to really think long term about what do we want to see when we walk out our door in Crested Butte in 50 years.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on places being loved to death? Like now you have to get a permit to go to Conundrum Hot Springs, for instance, or Hanging Lake is one that seems to be in the news a lot. We haven't quite hit that point, I think, for most things in Crested Butte, but what do you think about that? Like places, people, it's great that people are out, but is there a point where you think it's too much?
And this is a very important topic to discuss, and I think there's several different ways to talk about how to not love a landscape to death, but I do think that it's happening. I think that there is a carrying capacity to landscapes, especially sensitive high altitude landscapes.
Uh-huh.
And congressional public lands bills and thinking about the tools of wilderness and special management areas are one way to think about how we can have protections for landscape. But there's also other ways that we can do that, and I think that the community here is really stepping up through things like the One Valley Prosperity Project and doing some planning through the Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee, or the Crested Butte Conservation Corps, or Mountain Manors. Those sort of things, having a combination of people who are on the ground now working to educate people on how to be responsible stewards of the landscape while also thinking long-term about what we want for the management direction of public lands is about the most proactive way we can go about keeping that sense of place we're all really drawn to here, in my opinion.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, let's say that Trail 401 we decide is, or not we decide, but let's say that it becomes too crowded, in someone's opinion. What are your thoughts on the pay-to-play system that comes up in a lot of places where you have to pay maybe to ride 401 or to go to someplace that's really popular, like Irwin? I'm trying to think of places that are really popular around here. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's such a big issue, and something that I've really thought a lot through in my time in graduate school, which is really big questions of how do you tackle things like appropriate funding for our land management agencies to be able to have the staff and the capacity to take after those things. And if those aren't in place, what else can we do as a community? And so I'm not opposed to pay to play to an extent. I also think that public lands are an absolute gift that we have as Americans, and that there should not be a financial limitation that would allow or not allow someone to be on public lands.
Yeah.
So it's a wicked problem. There's a lot of different theories about how to go about it, and I think that, again, there's no silver bullet. So maybe some of those places where, permits are appropriate because of extreme resource damage is appropriate. But other places there should be, free access to public land so that people who, maybe are financially limited can still have that experience, and money is not an entry point to public lands.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a tough question for sure, because, and even these really popular places, like it might be someone's first time hiking to Hanging Lake and by Glenwood Springs that they've ever been outdoors, and then they become, conservationists themselves, or
Exactly.
at least care. So, but if they can't go there because it's too crowded, then they don't care because they've never been. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you do? I don't know.
It's a wicked problem, and a lot of people, some probably much smarter than me, are thinking about how to tackle some of those issues.
Yeah, it's hard. What are some of your favorite places locally, and how might they be affected by GPLI?
Yeah. Working with this project the past 2 years, I have been able to go through public lands in Gunnison County with a fine-tooth comb and learn about some really incredible places. I would say one of my favorites is actually quite far away, and it's the Black Mesa, which is north of Curriconte and the Black Canyon. And it's an incredible landscape. That one that if I've got the time to sneak away, I always love to go over there.
I was there 2 days ago for the first time ever after living here 25 years. It is so cool up there, and we went for a mountain bike ride for 11 hours and saw exactly 0 people.
It's incredible. Gunnison County is 2 million acres, and 80% of it is public.
Yeah.
And so that is a huge amount of landscape, whereas Gunnison County is as big as Rhode Island and Delaware combined.
Yeah.
And so, to get over to where you were from Gunnison, it can take 2.5 hours. So from here, you're 3 hours away and still in Gunnison County.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how much you can explore this landscape.
Yep, for sure. Let's start to wrap this up. Crested Butte and the Gunnison Valley is home for you. So why do you still choose to make this your home?
I choose to make this place home, not only for the landscape, but for the community of people who live among the mountains.
Yeah.
It is very much a group of people who have just been so welcoming and so interested in living a very fulfilled life in terms of being active and also trying to have a sense of place and culture here that is so unique that it has just jumped out at me and been a wonderful place to be for the past 10 years.
So you plan on staying for a while?
I do plan on staying for a while, yes.
Okay, good. Where can people learn more about you and or GPLI?
Yeah, we've got a website with all sorts of information, and it is GunnisonPublicLands.org.
Okay, perfect. Anything else I should have asked?
No, I think we covered it all.
All right, excellent. And one last question, who else should I interview?
Man, there are two people that come to mind.
You can name them both, yeah.
One is a couple. My friends Blaine and MJ Pickett are running a small farm in Gunnison called Calder Farms, and I think they are doing incredible work for local food systems here.
That sounds really interesting. Cool.
Yeah. And then another is a friend of mine. He's an artist, and his company is called Strive Art. He is a welder and has been doing incredible work. You'll see his signs around town. He made the sign for the Divvy, for the High Alpine Brewery, for the fire department, and then he also does incredible work for home interior. He does tables and bar stools, and he just did a custom handrail for somebody's home that's incredible. So he's another one who I think is really mixing his passion of art and welding here locally to create some really beautiful art.
And that's Strive Art. What's his name then?
His name is Brian Stewart.
Okay. Cool. No, those are great suggestions. I haven't gotten either of those yet, so I will hopefully be able to interview them sometime. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, and good luck with everything, and see you around.
Sounds good. Thank you.